Hi, and welcome back to the Bookish Key. Even more, welcome to the first official episode of this podcast. If you don't know me, I'm Elly, and here we chat about books. Today, I'm going to tell you about all the books that I read in the last quarter of 2025, so in the months of October, November, and December. I'm going to share why I read them, what I liked about them, what I didn't like, the rating, and if I suggest them or not. So get comfortable, grab something to drink, and let's dive in. The first book that I finished in October 2025 was The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's the first time that I approached the saga of The Lord of the Rings, but it's not the first time that I read something by Tolkien because this summer I read The Hobbit. My experience with The Hobbit has been kind of strange because I read it without knowing that it was a children's tale. So it was a little bit confusing at first, and I have to say that I didn't enjoy as much as I probably could have done if I knew a little bit more context of it. But my experience with The Fellowship of the Ring was totally different. It was different from what I expected after hearing so much about it. I was actually afraid it would be slow and heavy to read and too long, but it wasn't at all. It felt super smooth to read. I both listened to the audiobook, but I also read some pieces of it on ebook. I felt like being taken by hand and guided down a long road at a nice, relaxed pace. Even though it's not a fast-paced action book, Tolkien describes the journey that the characters take part to so well that it still keeps you on the edge of your seat in some moments. The way he builds the adventure and the world just pulls you in, so I am really glad that I finally started this journey. And going back to The Hobbit, I have to say that having read it before The Fellowship of the Ring, it's a big help to understand the world because it's not just reading for the first time about Middle-earth, but you already know how it works, at least a part of it. So it's nice feeling like going back to a place for a new adventure. The final mark that I gave to The Fellowship of the Ring was of 4 shiny stars out of 5. The following book that I finished in October was The Prince of the Mist by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I think it's the first time that a book has actually given me the chills, just like an horror movie. I'm not a horror lover, and horror is not my strong genre, but this book, was something else. The story is super intricate and interesting, and there are plenty of plot twists that keeps you guessing. Everything is immersed in this creepy atmosphere, and it literally feels like it's oozing off the pages. I kept having that feeling of discomfort that I only ever felt when watching exactly a horror movie. So my final mark was 3 stars, not because it's a bad book, but just because it made me uncomfortable, still in a positive way. So that's absolutely up to you if you're going to decide to read it. After all those creepy vibes, I definitely needed something cuter, so I read Landline by Rainbow Rowell. It took me a little while to fully get into it, but it got much better in the last 30%. That's when it really hits its stride. What I love most is how realistic the protagonists felt. Their struggles, their weird little habits, and their relationship development felt totally real in their behavior and growth. In this book, Rowell was amazing at writing characters that feel like people you actually know. The story is sweet and hits on some real emotional truth about marriage and communication. The only real downside for me was the formatting. The story jumps around in time, and the book doesn't always separate the time changes well on the page. Sometimes I had to go back and reread a bit to figure out if we were in the past or the present, and that broke a little bit the flow. But still, it was a really nice book and really needed after The Prince of the Mist, so my final mark was of 3 stars, 0.5. And after that, we have a big classic that was in my TBR since probably around 1 year, and I finally read it. I am talking about Dracula by Bram Stoker. I was so scared to approach this big classic, but the experience was great. The epistolary format made the reading a little bit slower but smooth and helped me get passionate about the story. On the other side, it also made it difficult to get attached to the characters. I felt like I didn't got to know all of them in a deep way. And then, it's an old classic with all the problems that this entails. For example, in this one, sexism. But I really like the effort in the female characters' representation among the papers. And, well, that's my personal opinion. Every time that we approach a book, we should be aware of the context in which it was written, and keeping that in mind, actually Dracula is a really great book. So the final mark that I gave was 4 stars out of 5. We finished October with one of the best book that I read in 2025 and probably in my entire life, and it's Blood Over Bright Heaven by M.L. Wang. The whole setup is just amazing. The magic system the author built is genius and mind-blowing. I found it so unique and well thought out that it really elevates the entire story. As someone that loves magic and loves to write and at the same time to code, when I read about how the magic was working, I was like, wow, that's literally genius. Plus, I love the world building in general because it felt huge and still detailed in all the small particulars that were needed, but also not that needed to the plot and the development of both the story and the protagonists. The characters were fantastic. I completely fell for almost the entire cast. I actually loved Thornhill more than Shauna. I actually loved Thornhill even more than Shauna, that is the main character, who is this strong woman ready to fight for her ideas and what, in her opinion, is right, even if the society tells all different things. This book delivers a killer story, also magic, and a world that you can sink into completely. So I absolutely recommend it. Extra Point is a fantasy dark academia book, and it's a standalone. Think that, in my opinion, for fantasy books in this time, it's so difficult to find. Absolutely 5 stars out of 5, super deserved. That was all for October, so we can move to November. The first book that I read in November was Good Guy by Kate Meader. It was my first time reading something by Kate Meader and reading sport romance, and I have to say that I am not disappointed. Good Guy is a light read, the one that touches on important issues such as harassment in male-dominated workplace and homelessness that American veterans end up facing. I found the characterization so accurate that I feel like I was sitting among them during the gaming evenings. Thank God for the writing style that was smooth and realistic. The female protagonist was strong, still with her everyday struggle, and the male character is the classic strong guy with a human side that you don't see that often. A little bit cliche, but I have to say that when the cliche is treating in a nice way, it works really well. Good Guy got 3.5 stars out of 5. After Good Guy, I finally approached a saga that I had my eyes on since so long. I read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Now, the story is super interesting and the world building is amazing and full of details that I really enjoyed. I also like the characterization, especially of the main character. Jude is a total badass and I absolutely watching her scheme and fight her way through the fake court. My only complaint is that there was a little bit too much introspection. Now, when I say much, I don't mean much in quantity, mainly in the wrong places. Sometimes, right in the middle of a huge important action scene, the protagonist's inner thoughts will pop up and interrupt the flow. I wanted to focus on the fight and not their feelings about the fight. I mean, at least, not in that exact moment. Apart that, the plotting is brilliant, the tension is high, and the ending is wow, everything. Cardan in the last few pages was amazing. It kinda leaves you desperate for the next book. And after all that tension and crimes, I went back to a chill book that was Pumpkin Spice and Not So Nice by Becky Monson. This book was exactly what I needed, super cute and a light read. It's one of those stories that just makes you feel warm and cozy. It was perfect fall vibes. What I loved most inside of this book was the character development, watching the two main characters figure things out, and especially how they both discover new things about themselves through the other person was really rewarding. They felt like real people growing together. Now, about the romance itself, I don't think the relationship was super intense or heavily founded in the classic sense, but it definitely wasn't rushed either. The great thing is that it left me with the feeling that this was just the beginning. It felt like something that still has to grow and get stable long after the final page. It was sweet and felt generally earned because it wasn't instantly perfect. The final rating that I gave to Pumpkin Spice Not So Nice was of 3 stars. To stay in theme with Dracula, I also read an Italian book that it's called Il battesimo di sangue. Translated, it's literally the blood baptized. And in this book, you can find the story of Dracula before becoming the famous character that we all know. The reading was a bit of a roller coaster ride. I have to be honest, at first I found it a bit superfluous. It seems to lack the details and development that will have made the story really solid and interesting. It's a shame because the idea had its own potential. Fortunately, it picked up at the end and the story found its rhythm and direction, ending in a fairly satisfying way. My feeling is that with a little bit more care and depth in the middle section, the rating would have been much higher. In the end, Il battesimo di sangue by Natasha Lughetti is a good read if you're looking for something quick and maybe Italian. Then we have one of the most satisfying reading of 2025, so this is big news. Halloween Party by Agatha Christie is the first Agatha Christie's book that I genuinely enjoyed. The murder mystery plot is super interesting and kept me hooked the whole time. It felt fresh and complicated in the best way. Plus, well, you can never go wrong with Poirot. He's always such a funny and quirky protagonist that really lights up the entire investigation. What sealed the deal for me was the ambience of the book. It was absolutely perfect. The spooky autumnal settings just made the whole mystery feel so much richer. So I think that in 2026 I'm going to give a chance to another book of Agatha Christie because maybe I finally grow up and I'm going to be able to enjoy them more than I did in the past. The final rating for Halloween Party was of 4 stars out of 5. In November, I approached a new author for me, that is Sheridan Le Fanu. I had to read Carmilla, but I found a compilation of novels, so I also read Green Tree and Mr. Justice Harbottle. Now, about Green Tea and Mr. Justice Harbottle, they are two short novels that actually didn't left me with a lot. Were they enjoyable? Yes, with up and downs. I gave both of them 2.5 stars. While Carmilla was an entire different level. I honestly think I enjoyed Carmilla way more than I did with Dracula. It was easier to read since it's not told through letters, so it goes much faster, it flows quickly, and it felt more direct. Plus, the sapphic elements into the book was amazing. The intense connection between the main girl, so Laura, and the mysterious Carmilla is spooky, romantic, and totally compelling. It takes the whole vampire story and makes it feel fresh and intimate. Even if, in a different way, it got 4 stars, exactly as Dracula. After Carmilla, I sadly had a really low moment because I read The Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. Now, coming from the author of my beloved The Perks of Being a Wallflower, I had huge expectation for this book, and my bad. The experience was disappointing and at times absolutely unpleasant. While I recognize, as I already said, that horror is not my primary genre, the issue here wasn't simple fear. It was an overwhelming feeling of discomfort that reached the disgusting sometimes. The book quickly descended from what might start as a dark, unsettling coming-of-age story into a confusing mass of disturbing elements. My biggest issue was the narrative's lack of cohesion. Everything that happens feels utterly without a reason or explanation. The horror scenes piled on top of each other, barely to ratchet up the feeling of disturbance rather than to serve to the story's mythology and to drive the plot forward. In the end, it felt less like a carefully crafted supernatural thriller and more like a bizarre, prolonged collection of sordid and unexplained events. My rating for this book is 1.5 stars out of 5, not because the writing itself, but because the overall reading experience was so uncomfortable that I actually found it painful to finish. The last book that I read in November was Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. Matt Haig has long been an author that I enjoy reading, and with this book, he absolutely doesn't disappoint. Here, he returns to tackle something we all know way too well, that super complicated relationship between our mental health and the insane pace of today's society. This essay is honest to the core. Haig pulls off a brilliant mix. It's part personal memoir where he talks about his thought years with anxiety and panic attack without any filters, and part sociological analysis, trying to figure out how this that he calls nervous planet, which is hyper-connected and always on, is essentially messing with our inner lives. A disclaimer that I want to give to everyone who wants to approach Matt Haig on these type of books is that if you read it, you have to be ready for his style. It's not a linear novel with a straight plot, it's a continuous stream of thoughts, aphorism, and super short chapters. But that's also the beauty of it, because it's the perfect style to reflect the central theme. So how incredibly hard it is to find a little calm and our own individuality in this world full of noise, notification, and things we should be doing. There is one sentence that particularly hit me while reading this book, and I'd like to share with you. That is, we have multiplied everything, but we still are individual self. I know that out of context could mean few, but I assure you that if you're going to read the book, you are going to understand why this sentence in particular is so incredibly powerful. This was the third book of Matt Haig that I read after How to Stop Time and Reasons to Stay Alive, and the final mark was of 3 stars out of 5. And with that, we switched to December, in which the first book that I read was Alchemized by Elly. Now, I have a lot of things to say about Alchemized, but I actually think that I'm going to still take a little bit of time to set my thoughts, and then I could do a episode apart, for sure a YouTube video in which I talk about it, but I'm still going to give you some insights about this book. To start, I want to set the record straight. I had high expectation for this book and it met them all, but it's still not the perfect book. In the pages we follow the story of Helena Marino, that it's a woman who during the war for the resistance and a member of the Order of the Eternal Flame. And now that the war has ended, or it seems so, she is imprisoned to be tortured because some of her memories are missing, and who is now controlling Palladia thinks that those memories are the key to definitely put an end to the war. I think that this book has been promoted in an absolutely wrong way. In my opinion, and I promise you there is no way in which I'm going to change my mind on it, this is not a romantasy. Is there romance inside the book? Yes, if you want to call it like that. It's a sick and desperate love, but it's not the center of the entire book. In these pages there is so much more. There is politics, there is intrigues, there is religious fanaticism and its consequences, all on the backdrop of a war that claims victims indiscriminately. One of the downs of this book is that even though the writing style is great and easy to understand, even for a non-native speaker like me, because I read it in English, the book results to be long. Mainly the first part that I see a lot of people struggling on. Suddenly you has to build a word from scratch and to help you understand it. This is my defense for this book. I do not agree with the criticism moved to the magic system and the world building. It is intricate and rich in details and full of things that you have to remember, but in my opinion, Sen made a incredible work in explaining it and making it understandable. So if you think you're going to read Alchemized, be aware that the first part is the slow one, but it's a hill. You go up until the top of it, and that is the end of part 1, and then from part 2 is a roller coaster just going down until you crash against the wall. That is part 3. You're advised. Another important thing that I want to say about this book before moving on to the next one is that it's not a book that I feel to directly suggest to people. It's a really good book, in my opinion. It's a book that I absolutely loved and it's going straight to the favorite of the year and ever, but it's a book that must be read with awareness of what you're going to read. So please, if you're considering to read it, read the trigger warnings and think if this is a book that you can actually dive in. If the answer is yes, then I'm wishing you good luck and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. And finally, the last book that I read in December and the last book of the year was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, so the first book that I read by this author. And even if I enjoyed it, it didn't strike me like the others. It was a nice reading. The concept behind it, this library that contains all the book of your other lives, was interesting and very well developed, but the whole narrative itself made me feel few emotion. The ending was very predictable, though it wasn't disappointing, but there are elements that seemed inserted to create mystery, but in the end they are not developed properly and are abandoned without solution or answer. It wasn't a bad book. It's not a light read either, since the topic that it touches, but it wasn't a 5-star experience for me. And we reached the end of this long list of books and thoughts. As I previously said, this is not a place in which I want to talk about how many books I read, but I have to say that what motivated me to read that much in this quarter was our community bookish challenge, in particular the autumn's books one, that is the seasonal one. We are currently hosting the winter one that is called Swan White, so if you'd like to check it out or join us, you're absolutely welcome. I'm going to leave the links for Discord, Goodreads and Storygraph down in the description, so please, if you like, we'll be so happy to have you on board. And thank you for staying with me. I appreciate a lot. Again, I am so hyped for this new project. Thank you for listening to me blabbering about all the books that I read. And if you'd like to share anything about your reading habits, your favorite books, the books that didn't convince you enough, any bookish comment that you want to leave, that would be super appreciated. Thank you so much for staying with me, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode. Bye!